Hello everyone. You guys are in my bed right now. If we've never shared a bed before, welcome to sharing a bed with me. As I was getting ready for bed tonight, I felt like it was the perfect time to talk about my nightmares, because who doesn't want to talk about nightmares and night terrors right before bed? Also, I'm joined here by Clementine. Oh my god. This is Clemmy. Here's the thing, Clementine also has nightmares. I actually don't think that's true. I think I'm just making that up. I want to talk about nightmares for a little bit because, and I swear this is all gonna tie in together, and then you're gonna be like, oh. Sorry, I'm doing my little night routine, okay? We have to moisturize the cuticles. What, I'm gonna go to sleep with dry cuticles? You're crazy. Sometimes my boyfriend is in my bed. I know. You guys are not the only ones I'm sharing a bed with. Sometimes we do share a bed together, and he has frequently told me that I am exhibiting behaviors not very normal in my sleep. One time I pointed into the corner of the room and I was like, oh. Another time I just kept yelling out in my sleep, Jake, which is my best friend, so that was a lot. A new one that he has told me that I am doing, most recently, the other night, he told me that I actually yelling in Polish. And not just lightly, like having a conversation, I was yelling. I do speak Polish. I think that would have been a lot scarier if I didn't speak Polish, but I was speaking Polish. And that freaked him out. And he had to wake me up and be like, you're speaking Polish? And then on top of that, then in English, I said, oh my god, he has a gun. Which, that's like not surprising for me because I have nightmares. And we'll get into that. Also in my sleep, I've accidentally clotheslined him. Like full on just... And I do feel really awful about that. And he's really understanding. I've been suffering with nightmares for the longest time, honestly. Like, I feel like I really noticed that they're like in a pattern since high school. It got pretty bad in college, I noticed. And I've had roommates since then who I've like shared a room with tell me that like I do sleep talk. I do get a little bit scary in my sleep. I do have reoccurring nightmares, honestly, a lot of the time. You know what? I did read this article, or maybe it was a study, maybe it's not, maybe it's just like an opinion-based thing, but that like the least interesting thing that you can do is talk about your nightmares with other people or your dreams in general. Like nobody cares about your dreams. Like apparently people's eyes glaze over once you start talking about your dreams, which does make perfect sense. I'm still gonna tell you about them, okay? And I have considered writing a dream journal, but I worry like, what if I don't even care? You know what I mean? I just don't know. I'm really bad at journaling to begin with. It's something that I need to get into. But as I was saying, I do have reoccurring nightmares. A lot of times I'm back in high school. A lot. I'm going to be 26 in a few months. A lot of times I am back in high school. I have those kinds of nightmares. I also have nightmares of like, oh no, you're on stage and like you have to do a performance and you're not ready. I'm not like a performer by any means. I've been in like one high school musical. Truly. Yeah, that does sound like a nightmare to like be on Broadway and then like go on stage and not know what I'm supposed to do. There was a pretty rough time in my life where I didn't know this at the time, that I had OCD. I was not diagnosed yet. Didn't have any treatment for it because I didn't know I had OCD. The problem was that my nightmares started blending in and becoming what I believe to be premonitions. I thought that my nightmares could not simply just be nightmares. I thought they always had to mean something. A lot of this had to do with me believing that everything had a meaning, that everything meant something, and not that it's like my body's natural response to stress and anxiety and, you know, underlying OCD. I happened to be working at a place. I remember my boss bought a dream book. And so they were reading like what your dreams meant and were like interpreting them for me. I would tell them what my dreams were about. And I'm like, wow, clearly, like I am the all-knowing. Like I know something that everyone else doesn't. And sometimes like my dreams would come true. I had this kind of like phase of life where I really thought, it's kind of hard to explain. Thought I was psychic. I didn't know if I genuinely believed like fully truly that I was psychic, but I was like, these thoughts and feelings are way too common and happening way too often. Like clearly these are premonitions. I even have a video, an old video on my channel that's like proof that I'm psychic. And it's like me listing all these things that, looking back now as a more educated on OCD person, a person who knows the tools, a person who has gone through ERP, a person who has talked through all of this, I clearly realize that these things are not actually psychic abilities or premonitions by any means, but mere coincidences, which the exact thing that I would have been told about this 10 years ago was like, don't let anybody tell you that they're just coincidences. You are special and you have powers, and these are not coincidences. These are bigger than you. I really believe that I was like so in tune with the universe and the world that my dreams meant something all the time. There have been a few instances where I have had dreams that I fully thought that they meant more than they really did, directly as a result of OCD. I'll just have random dreams about somebody that I know loosely in my life, maybe an acquaintance. They are no longer dating their partner. And then it could be months down the line, months, years. And that person will like announce like on Instagram or something that they're single. In my head, I was fully convinced that I was like an oracle of some sort. I was basically exhibiting magical thinking, and I didn't know what magical thinking meant at the time because I thought that I somehow needed, I knew this. I knew something that nobody else knew, even though that does kind of tend to happen in relationships. Like either you do end up being with that person forever or you do break up. And so for me to have a dream about somebody breaking up isn't exactly a premonition of sorts, but it's most likely a coincidence. But OCD does not like that and does not latch on to things like that and will suddenly think that everything has to have a meaning or a connection. And those thoughts made me fully think like, oh my God, I'm a psychic. Because of your mental health, OCD in this scenario, your dreams will start to make you feel guilty and like a bad person because they are simply thoughts that you cannot control. You are dreaming, you are sleeping, you don't have control as you normally do. I mean, people with OCD already struggle with controlling their thoughts and intrusive thoughts, and we're already taught so many times that our thoughts are not a direct example of who we are as people. They are just simply a symptom of our disorder, that our thoughts are not direct reflections of how we actually feel. However, not knowing you have OCD and not being treated for OCD, how are you supposed to know any of those things? You know what I mean? How are you supposed to know any of that? I'll give you an example. This was very difficult for me, but a few years ago, there was a time where I had dreams. This was right before COVID. I had really awful dreams about a big flood, the end of the world essentially, and my boss at the time said to me a scripture from the Bible, and they just like said the numbers. So I'm personally an ex-Catholic, never read the Bible. Didn't care much for it, but I did go to Sunday school. Keep that in mind. I had this dream about a really bad flood. Had the dream about like the end of the world. The next morning I wake up and I'm really freaked out about this dream, and I decide to Google said scripture, and it does happen to be about a flood. What we don't tend to think about in our minds when we have OCD is that things can be pure coincidences, or that they are deep down memories from inside our mind that we quite literally are like harvesting inside of our brains, because our brain is really good at storing memories. Like things that we don't have to think about at the forefront of our mind, our brain will remember those things. However, to me, I was like, oh, it's a sign. It's a sign that the end of the world is coming. It's clearly a sign. And that gave me a lot of anxiety because I felt like somehow I controlled that. Somehow that my dream meant something. COVID happens. Not a flood, but COVID happens. The pandemic happens. I thought it was my fault. I thought it was completely my fault because of my nightmares. I thought my nightmares had somehow been connected to this all, that I should have seen this coming, that I had a way of stopping it somehow. And I felt the most severe guilt, and nobody in my life could understand that. Why I felt so guilty for the pandemic, because I felt like I could have somehow controlled and stopped it. On top of that, it just made me lose my marbles because I was like, oh my God, clearly the next step is that the end of the world is coming, because that's what was happening in my mind. It started to get really, really, really bad. Here's the thing about OCD is that sleep quality in general affects OCD so much. First of all, anybody should be getting a good amount of sleep, at least 7 to 8, 9 hours, what your body needs. Everybody should be getting a good amount of sleep, but people especially with OCD are really affected by sleep, and a lack of sleep can affect your mental health or anyone's mental health very negatively. I didn't know that because I didn't know I had OCD, so I wasn't taking care of my sleep hygiene as best as I could have. Does this make sense? I bring this all up to say I carried this severe guilt with me for a long time up until I was diagnosed with OCD, because I fully thought that somehow my dreams that were honestly just nightmares, because I was consuming a lot of negative content. It was like one of the last things on my mind. I can now fully acknowledge they were nightmares. They were things I was actively scared of. I thought it was my fault for these terrible things happening in the world. If we think like that constantly, that every negative thought that we have is somehow connected, bad things happening in real life, that logistically just doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. But that's the thing about OCD, is that OCD doesn't care if something makes sense or not. OCD does not thrive off of logic. And so it made perfect sense in my head, and I didn't understand how it couldn't make sense in other people's minds. I remember that this really kind of affected me because this kind of idea that I was psychic and that I felt when bad things were coming, also having terrible, awful nightmares that I could not control. And so thinking that these things were connected, thinking that I had premonitions, it led to me having a severe amount of guilt in my life, because anytime that I would have a negative or an intrusive thought and that thing would come true, it felt like the world was ending. It felt like I was spiraling. I had a thought before in my mind that maybe one day my mom might have breast cancer, because I feel like that's something that you might think about. Breast cancer is a very common cancer. A lot of people have breast cancer. We probably know at least one person in our life somehow affected by someone having breast cancer. Breast cancer is not like profoundly rare by any means. And I had a thought at some point in my life that maybe one day my mom might have breast cancer. So when my mom is finally diagnosed with breast cancer in 2020, I somehow think that, oh my God, I caused this, I predicted this, and I didn't stop it. That kind of pressure and weight can do some heavy damage to your mental health. Like, that is a lot of pressure to put on a young person who doesn't understand what is happening or their mental health. I would wish that upon my worst enemy. I really wouldn't, because knowing the skills that I have now, that I've learned through ERP, such as my thoughts are not a direct reflection of who I am as a person. They are just a symptom of my OCD, or also that I cannot control things bigger than me. I have no control if my mom gets breast cancer. I have no control over a global pandemic. I have no control over mass floods. I realistically actually don't have control over that at all. And just because I have thoughts about those things, that does not directly mean that I have control over that. Being able to think about these things logistically because of ERP has helped me so immensely. But not only that, has made me prioritize sleep so much more. Sorry, Clemmy's screaming because she wants to go to bed. I bring this all up to say that I still struggle with nightmares. I have for many years of my life. I've tried many different things, but what I do know through ERP is that my nightmares are not a sign necessarily that I am responsible for something happening in the real world. And this overwhelming sense of responsibility is not a good thing. It is actually quite harmful, and I need to break that pattern of thinking in order to help myself. Because I think about my life now, had I never been in ERP a day in my life, and if I'm going through these nightmares to the point where I'm yelling in Polish, I'm screaming, he has a gun, I'm pointing to the corner of my room, my partner's telling me that I'm flailing in my sleep, and I have such dark nightmares that sometimes it's difficult for me to actually talk about them out loud and tell people what they're about, because they can be super gruesome, super violent, super just awful. I think if I were in this position now, a lot of these things would eat me up, because how could I possibly live with OCD and these nightmares and also feel a sense of like morality? I put a lot of pressure on myself, my younger self who didn't know I had OCD, thinking that these things in my sleep that I had no control over somehow had an effect on reality. I can't imagine continuing to live my life like that. And I'm so happy that I did get the help that I needed once I got diagnosed in 2021, once I started ERP in 2022. Ever since I prioritized sleep, I cannot emphasize that enough. If I am not getting enough hours of sleep, I do notice in every single day that my OCD struggles way more. My symptoms intensify. And so I know that if I didn't get a good night of sleep, I need to give myself grace. I need to. And I need to go to bed earlier. And I need to fit in a nap somehow. I think we often try and overwork ourselves and obviously spread ourselves thin, especially as like young people, try to do as much as we can in the day and try and take the night back because our days were stolen from us. At least that's how I felt commonly, like especially in college. But I know now, if I'm not sleeping, my OCD is gonna get worse. If my OCD is gonna get worse, then I'm probably also going to be struggling with my nightmares. And if those things are happening, then I'm going to feel a grand sense of responsibility that somehow my nightmares are connected to everyday life, and that I somehow have control over things like the weather, a global pandemic. At one point, yes, I truly believed that I had some sort of connection and that I had some sort of influence on nuclear bombs and nuclear war. So while yes, my nightmares are one thing that I need to get a hold of on my own time, I'm working on it, okay? It makes it a lot easier that I'm already not thinking that these nightmares mean something. I had to break that cycle so heavily of like, not everything means something. Not every thought means something. And that can be really hard to do, because as a person who was like spiritual and believed in manifestation and law of attraction, and that my thoughts all had a vibrational energy, and that if I had a good thought and a positive thought, then good things would come my way and reflect back to me. And if I had a negative thought and an evil, bad thought, then I was putting bad and evil out into the universe, and that's what I would get right back. Girl, I didn't have any control over my thoughts, especially in the height of my OCD. And I still don't always have control over my thoughts, and I sure as hell don't have control over my nightmares. And that's a really stressful thing to put on a person, to make them believe that every thought that they have some means something, or that they have control over something. Give me a break. And for that, I'm grateful for ERP. And I mean that so wholeheartedly. I've learned so many skills through exposure and response prevention therapy, like learning that my thoughts don't have to mean something. You know what? Yeah, I did have a really awful dream about nuclear war. Oh, and nuclear war didn't happen today, even though I had a nightmare about it? Okay, noted. We're gonna keep that in the back of our minds. Anyway, highly recommend starting ERP if you have not yet, giving NOCD a try, because NOCD is such an amazing platform in order for you to get help for OCD that you deserve. If you guys have been thinking about trying out NOCD, highly recommend giving it a try. It's the leading provider of specialized OCD treatment, and they make ERP therapy accessible by making it virtual. Make sure that you book a free call with NOCD.com. We'll have a link down in the description. And if anything that I said about nightmares, premonitions, feeling a grand sense of responsibility, connections to things that you really don't have control over, highly recommend giving NOCD a try. Speaking of which, it is my time to go to sleep. Time to pull out my Kindle, okay? Thanks so much for hanging out with me before bed, and good night.